Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I had some people ask me yesterday, because I guess this hit the news in the last day or two, that there was a study done by the American College of Cardiology, which kind of released a statement. I guess they had a news story, which, again, I might link in the comments down below. I do not link scientific studies in my description because I've got strikes on my account for that before. YouTube doesn't like me to link studies or scientific material directly. In fact, guys, I've been sued over discussing scientific material before. It's kind of a gray area for some reason in this society, and I don't know why it happens to be that way. I've just had a lot of problems from discussing research, both in courts and on YouTube. So I don't know. Crazy world we live in today. Can't discuss science. But that being said, let's talk a little bit about what they said, because some people are seeing it and they're taking it completely out of context, because they said that a healthy diet can include dairy and meats for heart health, right, worldwide. But what people need to understand is that it's not just dairy and meats that they looked at, that people are going to take that out of context, because if someone just hears, oh, lots of meats and dairy can promote heart health, as far as the epidemiology they look at, that must mean that I can just eat unlimited amounts of really fatty cuts of meat. People will jump up, oh, that means I can go do a ketogenic diet and there won't be any heart health consequences. It's healthy because they said societies that are high in dairy and meats were associated with lower incidences of cardiovascular disease and mortality worldwide. That's not an entirely true statement. All right, that's absolutely not how epidemiology works. Then that's taking something to the most farthest, ridiculous extreme that they didn't even study or look at, and which we know is not a wise idea. All right, this is not a free recipe for people to just jump up and say, I'm going to eat 4 pounds of steak every day and a stick of butter, because this epidemiology showed that. So, well, you do that, you're probably going to have a heart attack. All right, let's just call it like it is. If that's what you consider to be a healthy diet, you will have cardiovascular disease eventually from it. All right, that's just absurd, and that's not even what they said. I mean, you only have to look at the first line, and this is again looking at epidemiology, cultures around the world and countries and groups, and they compared cardiovascular disease rates and mortality from cardiovascular disease. A diet comprised of higher intakes of fruit, vegetables, nuts, legumes, fish, dairy, and meats was associated with lower instances of cardiovascular disease and mortality worldwide. All right. Okay. What they noted in that was unprocessed meats specifically. All right. Processed meats have been linked with various forms of disease by multiple organizations and medical groups and studies in epidemiology all over the world. All right. So what do we mean by processed meats? Like sausages and bacons. That's a perfect example. A lot of lunch meats, depending on what they put on. Processed meat. Processed meat. I don't know what people are not understanding about that. How about meat that you deep fry in some way? Like meats that you're cooking in oil. I'd say that qualifies as a processed meat. But a lot of those have actually are associated with colon cancer. Right? Eating too much bacon and sausage is highly associated with colon cancer. And the other thing we come to is, again, saturated fat content. I'm sorry, it's pretty well understood by the Atherosclerosis Society that elevated LDL cholesterol, no matter whichever type it is. I know the people who want to defend ultra high meat diets say, well, there's 2 types of LDL. Well, that's not what the research is saying. That's your perspective and your excuse to say, hey, it's cool for me to eat, 60 grams of saturated fat every day and I'll be just fine because it'll only be my good LDL that's elevated, the benign one. Well, that's not really what the data is saying, guys. That's what pro-keto book writers are saying. But their book is not going to save you from the health consequences of that, guys. And I mean, I don't want to sound like a vegan here because I'm not. I don't support veganism, but people need to put these statements in context. Most of the meats that they're talking about around the world are lean meats and they're unprocessed meats when they're looking at these studies. And most people are not comprising their diet entirely of meat. That's another perspective too. What essentially this is saying, when you look at this, is that a balanced diet of whole foods, all right, let me state that again, a balanced diet of whole foods that are unrefined foods seems to be associated with cardiovascular disease. If you wanted to put it into context, that's what we're talking about. Because if you were to take this in the order, and let's say you prioritize your food intake based around the stuff that they listed in that order. So your diet would be really heavy in fruits and vegetables, fair amount of nuts, legumes, and then fish, dairy, and meats. And they mean unprocessed meats, and they're not talking about eating the fattiest cut of the animal all day. Because again, high saturated fat is absolutely correlated with cardiovascular disease, and it has been for a long time, guys. What's been reevaluated when people say stuff like, well, it's been shown that saturated fat isn't harmful. No, saturated fat in moderation doesn't appear to be harmful. All right, you can eat too much of anything. You can eat enough of anything to hurt yourself, including water, to actually kill you, right? Anyone going to disagree with that? So it's really an absurd statement to say water is perfectly healthy in any quantity. All right, saturated fat is not healthy in any quantity. Absolutely is not healthy in unlimited quantities. And we live in a society to where we have access to unlimited amounts of saturated fat. Well, if you eat large amounts of saturated fat for a prolonged period of time, I mean, it's going to kill you. Again, I don't know what part of that people aren't grasping, of why people don't seem to understand that fact. That's the case. In moderation, it's fine. When people are talking about moderation, that means, you know what? Eating a fairly lean steak a couple times a week probably is not going to have any negative health consequences. But if you're eating a 1 pound fatty ribeye and then rubbing butter all over your baked potato with it for dinner every single night, that is associated with disease. So what they're saying here, guys, is that societies that have the highest intakes of fruits, vegetables, nuts, legumes, fish, dairy, and unprocessed meats, again, that means no bacon, no sausage, none of that nonsense, have the lowest instances of cardiovascular disease. Now, that's not always causation, guys, but I mean, realistically speaking, if you look at that list, if all you take from that list is, people who eat dairy and unprocessed meats have lower rates, well, no, the societies that eat high amounts of all of these various things in combinations. Let's be realistic here. Fruit, vegetables, nuts, legumes, all right? Those are absurdly healthy things for you to be eating. You need to look at the statement in its totality and look at what they look at in its totality. Not one of these cultures or groups of people that they looked at with a low cardiovascular disease sit around getting 80% of their calories every day from dairy and meat. And these aren't people sitting around eating bacon and sausage. These are societies that are eating large amounts of nuts, fruits, and vegetables, and they're eating unrefined meats and dairy and other stuff with it. Okay, that's definitely not what we do in America. That's definitely not what they're doing in the UK. Right? So context here, people, context. Because again, this is absolutely not making a statement about quantity of intake. Okay, so when this is noted that the societies that tend to have large amounts of all these things together, because what are you not eating? If you're eating all this stuff, you're not eating refined sugar. You're not eating refined vegetable oil. You're not eating heavily refined grains. You're not eating refined meat. You're not sitting around eating sticks of butter. You're not putting butter on everything and eating sausage and bacon. All right, that's what you're not eating in these societies, because they're consuming these other things in place of them. Perspective, guys, perspective. It's absolutely important here. You need context for something like this, and it should almost be common sense. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.